Hello, packages, parsers, and programs. We just passed Pi Day, which is wonderful for my alliteration, and it was just March 14th. Pi is irrational, which of course makes me think of Absec. They're both constants that influence our everyday lives. But pi, while unending, never repeats itself, which is very much unlike Absec. And so this week, we talk with Mark Curphey about a security practitioner's view on using LLMs to write and secure code. Grab a calculator and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Ever feel like your network infrastructure is stuck in the past? Meet Meter, the company reimagining what it means to get and stay online. Meter delivers full-stack networking, wired, wireless, and cellular, all in one seamless, scalable, and secure solution. From hardware design and firmware to software deployment and support, Meter streamlines every part of your network while giving you all the control and transparency you need. Whether you're managing a branch office, retail stores, or a massive data center, Meter gives you performance, reliability, and the visibility you need to stay in control. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to securityweekly.com/meter to book a demo now. That's securityweekly.com/meter. METER. Zero trust is clearly the future as threats get faster, quieter, and harder to detect. But implementing it shouldn't disrupt the business. ThreatLocker enforces default deny and execution in a way that remains enterprise-ready, scalable, and operationally clean. Unknown software is stopped cold. Trusted apps stay contained, and drift is locked down across the environment. It's zero trust that works in real enterprises and prepares you for the threats ahead. See why CISOs are adopting it at securityweekly.com/threatlocker.
This is episode 374, recorded March 16th, 2026. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Mike, you got me thinking, do you think there's any calculators out there that have LLMs on them yet?
There will be soon.
Yeah, I was going to say, if not, someone could probably build one in 15 seconds. Right? Not sure it'll add up correctly, but I could at least try.
But they built a calculator, exactly. How many tokens does it take to count the R's in strawberry? We'll find out.
It's pun time.
It's pun time. And even better, hang in there. Speaking of R's, RSAC 2026 will take place March 23rd to 26th in San Francisco. This is the last time you have to hear this announcement, listeners. To register with an R using our discount code, visit securityweekly.com/RSAC26 and use the code 56U5SecWeekly. And if you didn't recognize that other voice in the background, that's Mark Curphey, the co-founder and chief marketing officer at Crash Override. Prior to that, he was the co-founder of OpenRaven, founder and CTO of software composition analysis company SourceClear, which was acquired by Veracode in 2018. It feels so long ago, and led the MSDN subscription team at Microsoft. You also may know him because in 2002, he founded OWASP, the de facto online community dedicated to improving software security. Hello, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. Good to be back again.
Wonderful to have you back. And there were some very specific reasons I wanted you to come back because, as I mentioned in the intro, you're a security practitioner. And you've been writing writing code with LLMs, or however that should be phrased in the world of how code is written these days. But not only writing code, writing security documentation. You've been embracing LLMs. And I've just been curious about what that looks like from obviously someone who lives and breathes application security.
Yeah, sure. So before we get going, you and I had a little bit of a bet, right, about some of my stuff that I was posting on LinkedIn. So This is probably going to really, really come back to me, but let's go for it. What I am going to do is very quickly share out part of my desktop, and we will kick something off to see how good this stuff is. So I created SourceGlue, like you said, 2018, was the founder and CEO of that company. We sold it to Veracode in 2018. So 4 years later, we took about 20 something million dollars in VC money from Index Ventures and Norwest and Storm Ventures. And took about 4 years or so to build the company before we sold it to Veracode. What I'm going to do is essentially, apart from probably embarrass myself with the demo gods, but is somewhat of a parlor trick. So before I turned up on the call, I typed in this prompt. I'm doing a 30-minute podcast to demonstrate open agentic coding using Claude Code. I want to demo something. It starts the podcast, hopefully builds the same thing in the same time, right? And so I basically got it to produce me the prompt, and it then produced me the prompt, how to go build an SCA tool. So down here on the bottom, we're going to hit go at 4:01 in the UK, and we'll come back to it. And I tried it before the call, so we will come back. So the agentic stuff. So I guess I'd probably describe myself as more of an engineer who has spent time in software. I've certainly flipped between the two, but actually I've changed my role recently at Crash Override to do innovation. I think everyone sort of realized how the agentic coding stuff has changed so fast and so rapidly. And I became kind of somewhat obsessed by it, and it just seemed like a good place to do. So and this, my kind of take is probably a little different from some people's. I think there's kind of like two sides to it. There's the side of, oh my gosh, like this thing is gonna, make the world fall down and has a lot of potential for a lot of security issue. Everyone's seen kind of Claude Bot and, all the hallucination stuff and all of that, and it's absolutely true. But the opposite side is, oh my gosh, this thing gives you superpowers to go do stuff that you've never been able to do before. And that's become my kind of obsession, and that superpowers is kind of interesting to go, build security tools, do security stuff, including research, about projects, about accuracy, and just understanding it all. So that's kind of where I am right now.
Yeah, and a lot of that was really interesting to me as I was watching you post about your journey on LinkedIn. And before we get into the code, I'm going to save the more interesting part for last. One of the things that first grabbed my attention was how should we as people, I probably have to be more specific these days, how should we write secure code, specifically secure Go? And you had an essay about this. You had an approach that embraced LLMs. Tell us a little bit about that, because it was pretty interesting. That was like, you started OWASP, but you're kind of pointing out there's maybe OWASP needs some help here.
Yeah. So, again, back to the kind of notion that you can use this stuff for good. So basically what I was doing is I was building a whole set of tools for myself, actually building some agents that could do a bunch of stuff. And in general, I built tools using Go. And what I found is when I was starting to do code review with some of my code analysis tools, it kept popping up and going, this thing's broken, that thing's broken. So I then started using essentially Claude to say, like, what does OWASP say about this? And it turned out that basically there was a project called OWASP Go SCP. And the advice in there was basically flawed. There was a lot of things that were just wrong, and there's a lot of stuff that was just completely outdated. So there were outdated libraries that had basically been abandoned that they were recommended that you used. There's some code samples that were actually, not good. And what struck me was all of a sudden, this is not OWASP's mission. OWASP is actually now giving out bad advice, and it's giving out that bad advice, making, essentially running insecure code through the LLMs. And in some ways, it's not necessarily OWASP's fault. It's kind of always been the nature of the project. It's very easy to start projects, but it's very hard to kind of do things. And so I thought, wow, let's go try and turn this thing into something positive. So what I tried to do was basically like go and audit the project with Claude, and go work through a set of prompts. So like what's missing, like what's inaccurate, like what guidance should you have in this? And I created a giant, great big pull request. Now, it's not magic. Like, this is one of the things I've learned about all of this, is I think a lot of people think you just go type a prompt in and everything's magic. And it's not. Like, you have to have a human in the loop. And so a lot of people kind of talk about AI slop. And it's generally when there's no human in the loop, right? It's like I'll type some magic and I'll think everything's good. I won't validate it. But if you keep going back and validating it, questioning it, like I said, my view is it kind of gives you superpowers, basically. And what I was able to do is create a giant great big pull request, which essentially what I think pulls that project back up to, an updated standard. And I think what that taught me was that, again, you can use it for good, but if we can start putting things onto autopilot that are now being referenced by LLMs. I mean, OWASP's got a really authoritative domain. So what it says, people, but both, LLMs, Google and other people listen to, like they don't go and validate it. So here was an opportunity to go do that. I've just noticed my demo basically stopped almost straight away. So hold on, let's see. It basically
we can
asked me a
preserve the
question.
illusion. Yeah, exactly.
No, it asked me to go build it.
Happen.
After 55 seconds, it said, "What do you want to do?" I'm like, "Yeah, go build it."
But I think while you look at that, one of my reactions, I had a couple of reactions to that post about Go, and as you mentioned, a lot of the slop lacks human in the loop, and that's what we see with bug bounties just getting inundated with, a denial of service with bad reports because a human is not looking at it. But even if we look at the OWASP, humans are looking at it. Do we? I almost want to take a step back and be like, do we need an OWASP guidance about Secure Go? Why can't we just have the project itself or the compiler itself kind of emit, hey, we detected this pattern, this looks insecure. And that there, my thinking is kind of saying, I'm trying to be delicate here, but it's basically saying, do we need an OWASP or something like that? Why can't we just have better compilers, better language, tooling around language?
Well, I think to a large extent, kind of that's happened in the last couple of weeks, right? With Ford releasing, security and now Codex doing it as well.
Yeah.
And so like those agents, essentially good. And if we think about kind of what agents are, it's basically, a set of skills to go do things. So code auditing skills, they can learn from themselves. You have a set of what's called RAG data, which is authoritative data which they can go build, and a set of tools for going and doing it, and they can do it at scale. So absolutely. I mean, I think my kind of take on it though was that, of course, everything's not perfect and people kind of poke on the edge cases. But what produced in that PR, and I'm 100% stand behind, is that was orders of magnitude above what was there right now, even if everything wasn't 100% there. And so I kind of I think you've got to take the attitude of progress over perfection. And, if you want to raise the bar, there's a huge opportunity to go do it.
One of the things we've talked about, we just lose Mike, maybe. One of the things we've talked about on the show for quite a while is should be something be like secure by default versus do we have to go read an OWASP page or go through all these type of things? Do you see these LLMs possibly, is that a new form of default almost? That like there's an extra helper there can help drive some of that? Is that an accurate way to think about it? Well,
so when I first started going down the journey, and my wife's down the journey right now with accounting, and my 17-year-old son with, trying to sell baseball boots online or whatever the crazy schemes he has to do. I think you first kind of start to do things and you're kind of wowed by the magic, right, that happens. But what you realize after a while is that specificity counts, and that what AI is really doing is trying to interpret what you're asking it to do, and it will produce you subjective results. So the challenge, I think, with that is that context really matters and specificity really matters. So I think it's going to be very, very hard for them to have something directly out of the box. But what there is, particularly with things like languages, is you have specs for languages, right? You have specs for package managers, as an example. And so there are certain things that they can do incredibly well and certain things you can't, which again is why I kind of think that the human in the loop actually becomes much more valuable when you understand how to drive these things. And when the people understand how to drive them, then it's great. But I don't think we're going to get a magic shiny button that, produces secure code. But what you are going to get is someone who really understands how to drive it to be able to do a lot more, a lot better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a pattern that I'm seeing at the day job where some software developers, those that are good at delegating, like you give them like a big project, right? Those that are good at delegating the tasks off to other junior developers to help them work with it and get something done, their ability to use an LLM, so as you're saying, to actually be that human in the loop and guide it seems to be a little bit higher than those that like haven't quite figured out yet how to delegate and how to trust someone else to do something. Does so if you think about that, going back to you're talking about a spec language or a spec for a language. Go is great with that, right? It's quite well defined in many ways, right down to the space. So it's like, I guess where I'm going with this is do you see similar benefits on, I'll say, a looser language like a C or something like that?
Yeah, well, if I don't screw myself on the demo gods again, and I've been running for 4 minutes 47 correctly, part two of the thing is kind of interesting related to that. So again, when SourceClear was built, it's the first pure play security SCA, and we used to spend huge amounts of money, huge amounts of research trying to figure out how package managers worked, because you wanted to try and get really good results. And there's all these kind of crazy things like, oh, that's a different result from I ran it the last time. Like, why? Or they've updated it. What they're incredibly good at is understanding exactly and being able to document exactly how they work with all the edge cases and then feed them in. And so I think, for sure, the more nuanced it is, then the more subjectivity it needs to make. But when we have things that are very well defined, including the code's open source, it can go out and figure exactly how it works. So npm is a great example. Like, go look through the npm package manager spec. You know exactly how it resolves things. All of the options. All the switches, whether it's documented or not. Like, you got the code, and so it can understand that and figure out how to go build and produce something that's similar. So where does the knowledge belong? Well, I guess we had the shift left thing, right? Which for the most part, didn't really mean shift left. It meant just run and orchestrate tools by the build process. And I guess all the developers kind of then go and orchestrate the tools, which is fine. Shifting, maybe it's just a nomenclature thing. But the reality, I think, is now you got LLMs writing code, then of course they need to be able to look at their authoritative sources of data, whether it's RAG data and specs and things, but also the data that they're trained on. So they have an unfair advantage over anyone, and having them go look at static documents and that we know are kept out of date. That PR that I produced in whenever it was January has still not been accepted. OWASP is still producing bad security guidance from that. So it just feels like, whether we like it or not, that the right place and the most scalable way to do it is inside the model, which goes and does the coding, I think.
Yeah, and that's what you showed us at the very beginning, that an example of a prompt. And one of the things missing in that prompt was, comma, but make it secure for all the code that it was going to write. And, I've seen people write their prompts that slightly less joking than I have, but they stay like, don't introduce any of the OWASP top 10, or you are an informed developer who knows about the OWASP top 10. So even in the prompts, they're referring to the OWASP top 10 or maybe the OWASP secure code, Go secure code project. So it resonates what you're saying there. Where is that authoritative source? Yeah. I'm curious, how much of it, where do you see your time being spent either updating the authoritative sources or just updating a very authoritative prompt for the project you're working on?
Well, it's funny. There's two things. I actually have my guidance tell it ignore everything from OWASP, actually. And I'm not trying to be sarcastic or rude, but until they've picked everything up and I know it's accurate, I don't want to take that guidance.
Fair point.
So I'm trying to take guidance, and I make sure that it's taking guidance from the authoritative sources of places, and just a kind of standard practice, really. I'm trying to build something to help OWASP versus just throw darts at it, and hopefully that thing will fix in that sense. But so look, when I first started getting into this again, it was kind of like magic fingers. Oh, this is absolutely magic. But again, what I've kind of realized is it's not magic. Like, you have to know how to drive it. And so I have a fairly sophisticated kind of setup now, which includes some specialist agents, some specialist plugins. And, one of them is called Superpowers, ironically, which brainstorms and builds implementation specs, and it forces a, test-driven development process. And forces it to iterate over loops. And then the other one is called Vault Agent, which has language specifics, and which include agents for architecture and agents for code review and, specialist agents for React and everything. And so kind of my workflow is automatically that it will run through those things. And my workflow is automatically that I'll get 80% test coverage before anything is done. And again, so kind of the workflow changes, right? My workflow has always spent quite a bit of time on the requirements up front, having it, first of all, build an implementation plan, then build an engineering plan, then create GitHub issues, and the issues themselves then have acceptance criteria. So you know when done is done, and done means it's also run through its security reviews. So, it's just a sort of formalizing the process for doing that. So I don't forget or have to worry about security in my prompt. My development process is set up that's why I define the code quality, and because my process has defined it, enforces it, if that makes sense.
It does. And what stands out to me from what you said is that you're less worried about the specifics of Go, as an example. And I know, John, I think you've been working in Go a lot, maybe some other languages. But Mark, what you were describing, test-driven development, you sounded like maybe a project manager or maybe a product manager. I'm not sure quite what the title is, but it sounds like you're focusing on the architecture of this project rather than just the lines of code being written. And that sounds is that what people are talking about, what the development skills are becoming, or is there something different there?
I think it's a little different. So like the classic. Oh, by the way, we should flip back to the app when we're ready, because 6 minutes 43 it took to build the first instantiation. So we'll get back to it in a sec. But I think a little different. So I mean, like the classic kind of definition of vibe coding was like, don't care about the code. I don't think that's a smart way to do it. It's like, maybe it's fine if you're in marketing and you're trying to build a web page or something, whatever. But I care about the code. But what I do is invest the time setting it up. So I'm going to write something which is testable, maintainable, secure, and all of those things. And again, there's no magic. Like my code's going to have vulnerabilities for sure. It's like, but when I have a specialist architect agent who understands React, and when I have someone who understands, exactly how to go set up, I don't know, Kinesis queues or something, then you're just able to scale at a much better place. So I think investing the time in setup, what you're doing is really defining how you care about engineering and what's required. And then the agent can go and implement that on your behalf. But the more subjectivity you have, like just saying, I want you to write secure code, like it's, what does that mean, right? And that's kind of the problem with like saying, go and know about the OWASP top 10. Like,
yeah, that's my complaint about their, what is it, A6, secure design. That's so vague.
Right.
And so maybe we'll come back to that. But, at the very beginning, you introduced, what was it, Source Clear about 8 years ago, $20 million. We have a budget here on the website, a webcast of, 30 minutes. It took less, and zero. That was our podcasting budget. What have you produced? What kind of VCs can we get?
The first thing we did, and I'm trying to find the time here, was scroll back, but it was 6 minutes 22. I can't find it yet. Trust me, it's 6. That's when we told it was right. 6 minutes 22. We got down to producing this. So, like for sure, like it's a bit of a parlor trick, right? But like, it works. I can scan, things like, let's just look at critical issues that it found in my test data. Like, here's the Google records for it. Here's all the details for it. Tells you all the affected stuff. That's Google info. So 6 minutes 26 to be able to do that, and to be able to put it, ultimately kind of into a form that works. And then between now and then, because we had a little bit of a podcast snafu, I then told it to do the next thing, which was, you've now just built that SCA tool for doing that, extend it with 3 new ecosystems, and full details about the supported package management system. So that's, how they work. So that's kind of back to that thing that you were just talking about around knowledge, right? So like, how do they work, and what are all the details? And so that should be the last bit of this. 5 minutes 35. That took us then to go and basically add if we click on a new scan, now we've got, Maven, Cargo, Rust, stuff that we can do. So we can go run a Rust thing. But what we've also now got is a knowledge base that's exact. So that's kind of how that will flip up. And now we've also got a knowledge base of exactly, how cargo works, right? Of configurations that you need to do, like best practices for how you should go do it, right? So, all of a sudden, and that was, with a simple prompt. I mean, I tend to go back, get the specs for how you're doing it. Like that's literally all we put in, right? So again, that's kind of like, now I've got that knowledge, including SCA blind spots. So like, don't do this, don't look at that. We can very quickly build it up.
Have you registered the domain name OWASP.ai?
Someone else has. I mean, this is one of the other things that drives me mad that I've actually built into my other tool is someone registered owaspai.org and they're building an AI project over there on a separate domain. So I'm assuming it's OWASP, but look, before I stop sharing my screen, I'm going to type the third parlor trick in. Now create a new prompt that adds dev functionality and shows which libraries are out of date and updates any demos, right? So we'll just basically have it go create the prompt now, and I'll stop that. So the idea is now, let's go figure out how to extend that to not only things with vulnerabilities, but libraries that are risky that you're depending on. Like, when we first saw OpenSSL, it was like, oh my gosh, like this thing is not being supported by a set of engineers, and now we've got a problem. So again, Google have done a great job of producing that data. Now I can very quickly build a tool that supports that. And, ideally, if you have something like our Chalk project, like now go tell me what I've got in production that's not being supported, that you've got a problem, right?
And part of this, I know you're describing this as a parlor trick, but it is pretty impressive nonetheless. But I do want to pull a little bit of a Penn and Teller move, if you will. Let's show how the trick was done, because part of me thinks it was pretty fast, 6 minutes, impressive, but how much of that was because it basically took open source code that it already was trained on, it already had seen the patterns on and developed, and basically regurgitated it to be a bit provocative with my metaphors. So in other words, it just rewrote code that it already seen, that already existed out there, and you've just taken who knows what type of GPL, GPLv3 other code and put it into this. Is that an aspect that comes to your mind, or that is a worry at the moment?
I mean, I guess it's the same thing as Google Books, right? Like, what was Google Books or other things trained on? I mean, I don't know what code went into that model. I'm sure they're scraping the entire part of GitHub. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's it's an IP and copyright problem, isn't it? For sure. I mean, I'm able to pull that parlor trick, of course, because Google have got all the done an amazing job with osv.devs, but you did have writer and their CV stuff before. But I think that's also kind of what we've seen with the amazing part about open source. It's like once you have all the data sources to go do stuff, like, wow, amazing. So, hopefully Google will stick that behind an MCP server, and then I can have my agents go query it in real time, right? Things like that. I mean, that's again, it's just the amazing world we're living in, right?
It does feel like, and part of my motivation for that question is, people say, well, I'm going to rewrite curl in Go, and who knows, that could probably happen, but that's mostly call it a transpiling from C into Go. And where I'm going with that is then, let's take the other angle. You created this demo. It's obviously working. Did it in a lot shorter time than it would take humans to do. Is this now source clear? And the reason I ask is, you've got this demo. Is this what a company can run from? Is this something? What does it take to turn this into production that would have made it competitive with source clear back in the day?
Well, I mean, look, 30, what do we do? 6 minutes, 5 minutes. And the last thing, which is a feature which we can never figure out how to build. But it's a parlor trick, and, the data is available. So we don't, have to spin up a research team. But, if I spend less than 24 hours, for sure, I would have something that does everything that SourceClear did. It's incredibly fast to build SSO and, SAML integration, and way better than all of that stuff. Like it's really, really good at building integrations, like integrations into Jira and all the other ticketing systems. So just phenomenal, because it can go scrape all the integration documentation that's produced by all those places and build them really, really fast. So that's fantastic. By the way, it's 3 minutes 20 to add the other thing. By the looks of it, we can figure out whether that worked at the end of the call.
Amazing.
So like for sure, and like I haven't followed my process, my TDD process. I'm not going through the code. I'm not going through specs. I'm not iterating over it. So, but it's that order of magnitude, right? It's going from 4 years and a team of 25 developers, and $25 million or whatever we had to, 24 hours, one guy and probably 50 bucks of credits, right? It's an order of magnitude. But again, I kind of want to keep telling my kids, it's like, I don't think you should look at this, certainly not looking at this as replacing your jobs. What you need to look at it is this is giving you superpowers. My daughter's a barrister, or, about to become a barrister. And she's like, oh, this will never work in legal research because it won't stand up in the courts. And I keep saying to her, like, go through every single legal precedent. Like, you can figure out how to argue with a judge that it was based on this, this, and this that you may not have been able to flick through the books for. Like, I think that's the mind shift that you got to have is not, it may write insecure code or it may hallucinate a bit. Absolutely it may. But it's the superpowers that it gives you to do things that we've never been able to do before that I'm personally most excited about.
There's an aspect of that superpower, and this is something that, John, you brought up a couple episodes back, that idea of frameworks. Do we even need frameworks like React anymore? And what Mark is showing off here makes me think, does everybody need a source clear? Just riffing on that example. Or do we just spend a couple tokens, $50 in credit, just making up a number, and everybody rebuilds their own slightly different version of this? Is that a future that we see going? And is that the good future, or is there still something for that curl model of an open source project that, well created by humans that everybody uses because it understands edge cases, et cetera, et cetera? And speaking of barristers, that was a bit of a leading question at the end, but I still want you to try and answer it.
Was that to me or to John?
Either you first, I'll take it. Get John's thoughts as well.
No, I'll take it. Look, we've talked about this at work a lot, is that, there are companies out there, not just security companies, but if you're focused on your web UI and that's your kind of value prop, or doing basic things like pattern matching, like deduping and, vol management stuff, like your business is ultimately, you're going to struggle, because what this stuff allows people to do is build their exact user experience that they want and wire it into the business exactly they want. Not only not pay the vendor, but not take a dependency. They're not going to fix something for ages, like fix it yourself. So the fundamental kind of like shift in dev, I think, has changed from web UIs for the most part become demos. And the valuable companies and the valuable people are people that produce data. So again, that kind of like translates to like OpenAI and Anthropic. Like, they're producing the ability to produce data, right? Like, it's valuable. Their model is their data. And so I think that, things shift in that sense. And so, the types, I think, you'll see people basically, web UIs are basically demos, but people have been empowered now to build the experience, wire stuff together for exactly the way they want to go do it. And I think that's, it's phenomenal, right?
Yeah. And John, I do want to pull you in on that aspect too, because I imagine for what Mark was just describing, if you're an Absec team, just a natural language, how many vulns do I have? What vuln needs to be fixed? The UI feels like it's just a natural language prompt. It's no longer a bunch of nice CSS on top of a UI. I think you probably work more with just APIs as the consumer and APIs as your interface. How do you see what Mark is describing relate to your world changing?
Yeah, where I am in the stack, we don't have a UI. So people can't complain to me for that. It's funny thinking through those bits of that there. If you have a prompt on this thing that gives it that instructs it to comprehend the severity or the complexity or really understand these vulnerabilities, maybe it's going to stop bugging me about the infos. And then the security team's going to stop telling me I have to get this fixed by day X, right? It's we were talking about the MCP servers. It's funny, there's a group of folks out there now saying that MCP doesn't really need to be a thing and you just need to give it CLI access, which is scary. But at the same time, hey, if you can CLI and go to curl or something like that, it's becoming more and more boutique for your needs without having to have that huge development team to be able to do that. And that's the power there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, MCP servers, I think, are absolutely amazing. I mean, Google recently released, I think it was last Friday, MCP for Chrome. So, that allows you to go, trawl the DOM. But I've been experimenting with it to figure out how we can update our product docs. So what we've been looking at doing, and I think we can probably do it, is walk through the entire product, use Playwright to screenshot stuff, and build the documentation up. So again, you think about security docs, like these are amazing use cases. And when you combine those two things, MCP to MCP, yeah, exciting times, right? For sure. Exciting times.
Yeah, if you can keep screenshots up to date of what the current UI looks like for anything that's still going to need the UI, that's honestly going to impress me, because those go stale so quickly. But Mark, before we come back to that final feature that you want to show off, you're describing that set of agents and skills that you're creating, in particular the superpowers. At what point do you write your supervillains skill and go make bank off of bug bounties yourself?
Wow, I think we've seen it with Claude haven't we? I think it's happened. Yeah, I mean, I guess the bug bounties are kind of really struggling, right? And and poor people like Daniel who runs curl. I mean, just they're shutting down. David Hanneman Hansen said he's going to shut down PRs coming into his projects because there's slop. So yeah, I mean, I guess like anything, you've always been able to use stuff for good and for bad, haven't you? So I guess. Yeah, it supercharges the bad guys and supercharges the good guys, and it's the same old race, right?
Same old race. Well, and
I won't be on one side of it, but it would be pretty interesting, to be on the other side for sure, right? Okay, so let's finish. I didn't embarrass myself anyway. It kind of worked, but I do want a caveat. Like, it is a part of the trick, right? It's working, but like it's not commercial. All right. So how long? So what we did is we fed it in. The final bit, I asked it to create a prompt. Now create a prompt to add devs.dev. It shows the libraries, which ones are out of date or abandoned. Use update any demo buttons or tables, right, of what it did. And so 3 minutes 52, right? Another 4 minutes of processing time. And basically what we got now was additional functionality that can now go filter by the libraries that I've got, figure out which ones are outdated, and how many versions behind I am. So like we're one version behind on this one. Let's go figure out, have we got any abandoned ones? Oh, that one's been possibly abandoned. Like, go view the information on deps.dev. Like, here's what it is. So I don't know. I'd have to, again, I haven't looked at this. We'd have to go check, is this bugged or is this hallucinated? But, it'll go match it. So yeah, hopefully it gives you a kind of idea of like how fast you can go add stuff if you're interested, right?
It does, and it makes my brain think. We were just looking at node fetch as that just random example of here's a project that's been abandoned. I suddenly potentially feel more comfortable saying, oh well, why don't we just now unabandon that project for ourselves to figure out if we really need it, or just ask the LLM, hey, my software uses this node fetch. Extract the feature, extract the functions, extract the code that it relied on, and just do that. And it's almost like it statically compile all of my NPM massive hierarchy graph into just the few lines of code that I really needed. So that's going to be my next question.
Well, I mean, look, I just fact checked that one. Like July 25th, 2023 was the last time that library had an update. So it kind of feels like it makes sense. I mean, I think there's, actually, the deps.dev has an experimental API where they're looking at alternative libraries for things like that have been abandoned, which is pretty interesting. So I suspect what they're doing on the back end is figuring out extracting features, which is kind of a fairly well-known kind of computer science thing for formal methods and things, and probably trying to compare two libraries and one which is higher quality. So yeah, I suspect like you're saying, you can kind of figure out, I want better dependencies, and I don't mean better libraries. Like, improve my, who and what I depend on in production to make me more resilient, and those sort of things are now probably automatable, right?
Indeed. And Mark, you've done a wonderful job walking us through what is a very engaging parlor trick. So parlor trick, the description undersells how much fun we had here. You've also been doing this as innovation, innovating on code. This is from SourceClear. You've gone through a couple companies. And RSAC, speaking of which, coming up in next week, as from this recording, you will be at Innovation Sandbox. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to get into the final. So there's 10 of us on stage. I'm a little bit daunted. There's 1,500 people in the audience, and you get 3 minutes to pitch what you're doing. So we're talking about what we're doing with Crash Override, which is pretty, hopefully super interesting. It's definitely different from other things. I mean, ultimately we inspect the build very deeply. Build systems are like Vegas rules, right? Like, they're the puppet master. Like, it doesn't matter what security stuff you stick in, they basically ignore it, and they make their own decisions. And then, we basically tag artifacts and then track where they're going, so people know, this happened, this is the person that did it, this is exactly what's in the build, and this is where it's pushed into production. So going through that in 3 minutes, and sharing some of the stuff from customers about what they've done, which is going to be fun and a little daunting, but yeah.
Well, you exercised the demo demons today for walking through that compile live on the podcast. So appreciate that. And we won't make you go through the 3 minutes here, give you some time to continue to polish. But I am going to ask you, instead of 3 minutes, to describe Absec in 3 words.
Rapidly evolving industry.
Hard to say anything against that.
I should have asked Claude what the most impactful 3 words were, shouldn't I? But
next time.
Next time. We like the human touch on this one. But Mark, that was really engaging. Thank you so much. Listeners, please do check out Crash Override and the work that Mark's doing. If there is anybody working on some secure coding projects over at OWASP, go check out that PR. I will say, I think Mark said this as well, but I will say it was offered up constructive with love to encourage the project to be relevant and be useful to developers. So please check that out. And I want to say just once again, thank you, Mark, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks both of you for having me on.
Thank you as well, John. Thanks, everyone. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week. Generative AI is powerful, but it comes with real risks, from prompt injection to data leakage misuse and agentic AI. The OWASP Gen AI Security Project unites a global community of expert practitioners who tackle these challenges every day. Together, they've built practical playbooks, adoption guides, and the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs, resources any team can apply right now to strengthen AI security. And it doesn't stop there. This is open source, built by practitioners for practitioners working together to secure generative AI. Visit securityweekly.com/OWASP to use the playbooks and join the effort to protect tomorrow's intelligence today. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Mark Curphey about using LLMs to improve security documentation, write code, and save $20 million in a 6-minute demo. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella. And John, we have a budget of our own of 30 minutes, but $0 million. So let's see what we can do with that. Speaking of places with millions and even millions with a B billions, there is a Google Cloud. I pulled out their Cloud Threat Horizons report. This is from the first half of 2026 from the Office of the CISO. And they do actually have near the bottom all the people that contributed to it. So I'm always a fan of naming names, and we'll get to that in a second. But this is a long document. But the reason it stood out to me is that it's still AppSec related, is that, to quote, in the second half of 2025, threat actors increasingly exploited unpatched third-party vulns. And what they're saying is that pretty much since day one, valid credentials are the way into a network. They're getting stolen through access through Slack, leaked tokens, leaked cookies, et cetera, phishing, who knows what. And that's been a way that lots of companies really get compromised. But now it's maybe the tides are shifting a bit into the CVEs, into the KEVs. that's a bit self-explanatory because the K
As
is
kids
for
say.
known. Yeah, exactly. But that at least makes a case that Absec still is, we're going to need Absec for a while, even in the world of LLMs and AI, like we were talking about with Mark and just in the last segment. But does that, if you're, does it mean anything to you if I just say that a little bit of this is me framing it as marketing, not the Google Doc. I thought the Google their report was good, but threat actors and known vulnerabilities, you got to fix those now. Have I just said we've got to chase and fix all the CVEs out there, or is there something else that we should read or not bother reading into this?
I'm going to continue to slap my coat of paint on that we talked about in the last half of if our weaknesses seems to be more and more about the third-party packages which we're using, is it time to depend less on third-party packages? And I'm saying that again, not like have the LLM go and find the part you need and just, as you were saying, statically compile it into your app. It's a very expensive static compilation, but at the same time, I'm the engineer side of me, like I'm a huge, I don't like rebuilding wheels. So that's why we have frameworks and that's why we have these things, right? So we don't have 10 of us, whether humans, monkeys, or LLMs, we don't have 10 people rewriting the same framework or the same sort of input button or what have you. I don't know where it bounces between the two. But it's definitely shining a light on it. It's something to think about from my point of view. So I think it'll be interesting to see where this goes over the next 18, 24 months. My guess is we're going to see continued improvement in the sophistication of some group of folks that are becoming more innovative in how they use these tools versus others who have to sort of don't have that budget, whether it's tokens or dollars. Yeah, but that was a takeaway from that one for me is that sort of it really stood out. That the attackers are going to go for the weakest link, right? That's what they do. That's again their budget, how they use their budget. So I don't know. That's I'm trying to say something other than it'll be interesting to watch, but yeah, it's I think that's a pretty tough question. It's forcing you also to be more hopefully more careful about what packages you do import. And it comes back to the whole NPM thing and what's going to happen with that. And yeah, it's more to think about.
It is. And in their recommendations in this report, they still fall into the very familiar two recommendations were enforce that phishing resistant MFA, that's the passkeys, FIDO keys, etc. And they say strictly govern your OAuth and third-party applications. And the reason they do that is also they give an example. They talk about a real-world compromise of one of their customers that came through OpenID Connect, which is a little bit worrisome because, hey, we want to have strong OAuth and OIDC environments. But this was through an NPM. And so to riff what you were just saying there, one of their other recommendations in this report was use package managers that prevent post-install scripts or sandboxing tools. And what was surprising there is like how many of your NPMs, we even just talk about like having fun about the static compiling them, a huge undertaking perhaps, but how many of your NPMs did you know are running a post-install script that's basically an arbitrary RCE? And I wanted to bring that up in addition to another article here from Liren Tull, also a previous guest. This article is NPM ignore scripts, best practices. NPM ignore scripts best practices as security mitigations for malicious packages. So it's a lot of nouns I'm trying to string together and get the sense of it across. But the point of this is that he was talking about, that compromise that Google was talking about, that post-install script. This article is pointing out that another study that showed only about 2% of the NPM registry, which is thousands, I think maybe even 100,000 is on the order of magnitude of scripts and of NPMs, actually has a post install script defined. So it's one of those things like my mind goes, why do we even support this for one? But two, why do we even support this by default? Let's just turn it off, and honestly, nobody may notice. So it's in that spirit of secure by design, or more specifically here, secure by default. But that I wanted to throw that out. I'm not sure if there's other than, like you said, watching in that 18 to 24 month timeline. Not sure. Is there anything more we can squeeze out of the NPM security story?
Well, think about the reason a lot of, I'll say, package managers support, we're asked to support these post install scripts or something like that, is probably either, I'll get bitten for this, but either one of the potential reasons is laziness on the developer's side, or a weakness in the overall package architecture, right? Because it's basically, you've installed something, now we have to go and make it work, so we have to run something. Why, right? It's if you're installing a library, why do you have to go and run something that feels like a weakness to me? And it's one of these things that, as you're saying, with only 90, let's call it 98% of developers aren't using it. Probably some large percentage of that don't know of it. It's almost one of these undocumented features, almost, that some folks are using for good or for evil, but then others are realizing how to use it purely for evil. So the ignore scripts, that seems like that should be the default, right?
Yeah. And I wanted to tie that into the idea of trying to, as we talk about application security weekly, trying to figure out how are applications built, or what are the decisions that developers and architects put into crafting software. We had a little bit of that from the fun time we just had with Mark, showing how he approaches unleashing Claude Code to write a bunch of code. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was his thinking, test-driven development, his thinking about architecture, different agents. And that's my long preamble for pulling in an article about pre-authentication SQL injection in Fortinet EMS. This is from Bishop Fox. And now, is the only surprising part in that what I just said there was that I didn't pull yet another Fortinet vuln that was written up by Watchtower, picking up these poor devices. This was from Bishop Fox this time. But John, the reason for this is not just, here's another SQL injection, because man, that's a snooze fest. That's what the S in SQL stands for to me now. But what stood out was, I love the idea of iterating on code, rewriting code, and basically kind of increasing the abstraction so that I can understand it, and hopefully someone else reading the code can understand, oh, this function does this, this is how these relate, which is just a long way of saying I like to refactor and tinker. The counter argument to that is an example like this, where refactoring in version 7.4.4 introduced this vulnerability. It touched on a whole bunch of different files, and it said, cool, now we have a format string interpolation of a site header, and this is now through that site header, you can go and do SQL injection. Now, it did finally get fixed in the next point version for it, 7.4.5, so there was some fast iteration, but it just stood out to me as part of that. How do you decide, are we done with our code, or our code is maintainable versus we don't need to maintain this part of the code, we need to maintain it somewhere else, if that kind of makes sense. Hopefully you can at least understand where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've lost our listeners, so yeah.
They'll come back. It's okay. They'll miss us. I hear what you're saying. Man, it's one of those if it ain't broke, don't fix it type things in a way. You know, it's there. It was working, and I'm not saying this specifically to this group of developers, but like the general sense is, at least from my point of view, is, damn it, we've had that thing in prod for months or years. Why did you go and touch it? But at the same time, I understand where you're coming from. It's. I mean, take a step back and go, how would an organization have prevented this? I'm trying not to pick on Fortinet. Not doing a very good job. But from the point of view, do you have more testing? So is it more unit tests which should have been running against this? Do you do like better security scanning and security testing of your application before you release it? Did they threat model this refactor? So I think from a pure AppSec point of view, it's interesting thinking about how could you improve your organization so that you don't run into this type of thing. Yeah, I don't know. To me, it's one thing to I'll say expose a SQLi through adding new code or like a new input field or something like that. But when you're refactoring something, it's a sort of a different has a different feel, a different taste to me. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's where, especially when we're talking about cross-site scripting and SQL injection, such old vulns, one of my first instincts is just to ask, how old was that code? Meaning, like, is this a decade old plus of area that somebody finally paid attention to, they figured out that was there, they exploited it? Or was that new code? I think that matches what you were just saying in the sense of you can refactor and that just exposes, oops, there's now a path into this old code and that SQL injection always existed. And that's a flaw, that's a missed process for one reason. But in this case, it was new code that introduced the flaw, which to me sounds even worse. And that feels like a bigger failure of where was their security scanning, their code review, their testing that would identify that new code honestly really shouldn't be introducing this type of vuln. And that to me is two different ways of approaching that. And I guess one more thought there too is I still will love my refactoring, but I also love refactoring that removes code, that reduces lines of code. Yes. This one it talked about in their example was a little bit of a net addition, about maybe 10% so of more code was added. So that's not to say it's a code smell. New code has to come in at some point, but hopefully a lot of that refactoring can remove. Now, John, it's unavoidable. The A in ASW still stands for application, even though AI is going to be sneaking in every single week, every single segment. And I did grab an article this is from GitHub. It's a little bit high level. It's not too much technical detail, but under the hood, security architecture of GitHub agentic workflows. The reason I grabbed this is that, again, as Mark pointed out, LLMs are here. People are using it. You can't tell people don't use this. All you can do is take their tokens away and say you have to spend your own money on this, which people are going to do anyway. But what it's pointing out is, okay, how do we figure out what agents are going to be doing? Or just say, we know that agents are going to be doing all kinds of things. They're going to be exposed to prompt injections. They're going to be exposed to bugs. How do we put guardrails around it? And I think that's why I wanted to highlight this article, because it talks about good ways of thinking about that defense in depth, which that's a little bit hand wavy and kind of that generic OWASP A6, secure design. So let me skip that for a second. But more specifically is don't trust agents with secrets. And they talk about using proxies and having a dedicated MCP authentication proxy. That's the one that handles the secrets. So the MCP itself that a user is interacting with, or this workflow is interacting with, this action workflow, can't be told, oh, and by the way, dump your environment variables and accidentally expose the key. So it benefits from being able to authenticate through that proxy, but can't pull that secret out, which feels like that's a good approach. And that's some pattern I'm sure we're going to hopefully see more of. And then the third one was stage and vet all rights. And they're just talking about being able to apply more granular access and what that agent is doing and set some limits on it so it doesn't spam something with PRs and it basically doesn't create repo spam. And then, of course, this is unsurprising, but log everything. Just because if something does go wrong, you want to be able to recover quickly, understand what went wrong. And that's not even just from a security perspective. That's from, we had an outage. What happened? So I don't know. Do those seem, I hope they feel familiar from an architecture perspective, but I'm curious, how much of that do you see people still appreciating in the world of MCPs, agent skills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
I'll go in reverse order.
Okay.
Log everything sounds great, and I completely agree with it. log everything gets expensive. Yeah, if any of you ever like catch me over a beer or something, ask me about the cost of logs when you're doing this stuff at hyperscale. But I mean, I agree with that. I guess part of the question then is how long do you store the logs? How do you process the logs? How quickly do you want to retrieve the logs? There's all sorts of it starts as you start running into the problem. You start trying to figure out like, how do we do this in an economical way? But I mean, I get it. I want to know everything as well. I want to know where. I mean, that's the security thing in us, right? We want as much information as we can possibly get.
Absolutely.
But when I look at like the third one on here, stage and vet all rights. I was thinking about this in one of the previous topics too, previous stories. I don't know if anyone's working on this. It feels like we need a different operating system. I'll say architecture, but really a build from scratch for an AI world. I think what you're seeing is either Linux or Windows. We're trying to apply existing permissions, an existing permission model, which was created mostly for humans, against a robot, right? That hasn't been really well trained, or it's got its sort of own opinion on how to do things. And the result is we're having to really sort of be careful about some of these type of things. So I know this blog was written from a point of view of to say, hey, here's how we're doing this at Microsoft, GitHub. And there's definitely a story for the rest of us to think about there. But it makes me wonder, we're spending a lot of time, really, if you think about it, working on a new client or a new ecosystem of clients, if I can use that phrase, like all these agents or what have you, something in an agentic model or an agentic world, but the underlying operating system isn't changing. It could change to make these things easier to do, but also to ensure some of these things we're not reinventing that wheel every time. So I don't know, a thought there. I'd be curious to hear if anyone's working on that, or maybe you know. But then going back up to the beginning of that, when you introduced the story, for our listeners, Mike and I are starting to talk a good bit about offline, like how do we want to bring AI into these discussions? It's not AI Security Weekly, but at the same time, this obviously is starting to have significant effect on the world. So we're trying to figure out how do we cover these things? Do we have like these great demos from people like Mark, or do we try and provide not so much what's out there, but what path do you go down? How do you do these type of things? So if people are interested in that, please reach out to us with questions, comments, suggestions, what you want to hear, what you don't want to hear. I think we all know we can all make LLM jokes, but how do we position this stuff in a way which is useful and educational and helps us with either our hobbies or our careers?
Yeah, and just to riff on that as an example, even this article talks about a very old school cheroot as part of the jailing the agents. And I know I have to go back to the details about, AI-oriented operating system. But what comes to my mind there is the concepts that we have, like SE Linux journaling file systems, so we can roll back when that RM-RF accidentally happens, or having more specific granular attributes on our, rather than just the old school RWX and our octal representation of permissions. So that's where, just to riff, those are the examples I think I would highlight of what John was asking for. So yeah, listeners, let us know, because we're definitely interested in more of that and figuring out what's direction to take that. But John, you've helped me very much every single news segment to go in a direction I think that at least keeps me interested and keeps me on my toes to be thinking about what does the real world look like when people are writing software. So I want to say thank you for that.
Always a pleasure.
And say thank you everyone else who joined us this week. Please, obviously, if you're watching at the end, you hopefully listen to the Mark Curphey segment, but check that one out. We'll have some more like that in the future as well. Please do remember to subscribe so you can find out what kind of ways we'll be talking about AI in the future. Check out the show notes, share about us on the socials. And speaking of agents and data and computers, check out Data World by Compiler Bow. It's always great to add some more synthwave to your life. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.